Some points to note about Rope, Hitchcock's film from 1948, before you watch it. It is not the most critically acclaimed of Hitchcock's movies, but it is arguably one of the most interesting for a few reasons, which I'll describe in a moment. And incidentally, in past classes, it actually turned out to be many of my students' favorite film of the whole quarter. So I'll be really curious to hear what you all think about it. So, why is Rope interesting? A few things. Rope was the first film that Hitchcock produced and directed. So this means that it's the first time that he had full creative control over a film. Interestingly, too, Rope was also his first color film. So, like his first sound film, Blackmail, Rope presented a unique technical challenge for Hitchcock, which I think you'll agree when you see it hitched past with flying colors, so to speak. The color really is quite beautiful, and he'll talk a bit about the difficulty of getting that color right in his interview with Truffaut. Because Hitch did have full creative control here, he was able to try something new, something he always loved to do. He was always kind of experimenting with things. And of course, this gave him his chance to do that. Now, the story was based on a play. So the source material of the film was this play. It was this play from 1929 by a playwright named Patrick Hamilton. And Hitchcock wanted to make a film where the action was continuous and it was shot in a single location, much like a play, where, of course, there is no camera or no movie edits or cuts. And this technical attempt with this film is often the thing that the film is most known for. When you mention Rope, people will say, oh, that's the film where Hitchcock tried to shoot it in one continuous shot. So trying to shoot it as if the whole thing was done in one single continuous take rather than having any edits or cuts. Now, one key technical problem or a key problem in the execution with filming something in a single take is that there's not enough physical film on a reel to shoot an entire movie. Now, of course, with digital filming, that's not necessarily a problem. You can shoot as long as you want and not really run out of digital space, or at least you can run for a long time until your storage fills up. But at the time that Hitchcock made Rope, each reel on a shooting camera had only 10 minutes of footage. So Hitchcock could only run the camera for 10 minutes at a time at most before the film would run out and he would simply have to cut. So we had to try to figure out how to conceal the moments in the film where he switched from one reel to another. So if you watch the film, you will see moments, if you're looking for them, where he has that reel change or where those cuts are, where there will be a break or a moment when the action breaks visually. Each shot length in the film ended up being not quite 10 minutes. They last on average between 7 to 8 minutes, some a little bit longer, some a bit shorter. But Hitchcock did do his best to shoot for as long as possible without any cuts. And the end result is that this is an 80-minute film that has only 10 cuts total in it, and he worked to conceal those cuts. I think you'll be able to spot the cuts in the film if you're looking for them. And I did put a link to this piece up on Canvas for you if you want to see visually where the cuts are. The writer here describes the cuts and then also gives you a video so you can take a look at where those cuts are. And just to give you one example of one of the cuts, this is the second cut in the film. And you'll notice here that Hitchcock hides the cut by using the back of an actor and then fading to black. So camera goes up to his back and then it's fully black, and then that's where the cut is. So we know that that's where he had stopped the reel of the film and switched reels at that point. But it's a kind of an obvious cut if you're looking for it, but it is also rather elegant because it seems like the camera is just moving onto someone's back and then it's continuously moving. We should note that in spite of the fact that because he did not use as many cuts as usual, he couldn't then play with as many different camera setups, where normally he'd film the same scene from multiple angles or even that same actor from multiple angles. He couldn't do that here. And in a different film, he might cut, for example, from a long shot of the room to a close-up of the face. But because of his self-imposed restriction here of trying to do it in long takes, he couldn't do that. But I think as you'll see, he really is still shooting this film as cinematically as possible, and it's not just straight on like you would see a play. He quite brilliantly moves the camera around within a shot, and he uses different kind of camera angles and movements within the same shot as well. And he also frames the shots beautifully to draw our eyes to certain things. Now, to do all this kind of creative camera work within the same shot, he had to plan out each run of the camera meticulously before he would start the shoot. So kind of plan exactly where the camera was going to go and what the blocking of all the actors were going to be. So he had to plan how they would get around furniture. For example, if they wanted to move across the room, he had to plan, again, the blocking where all the actors would be at the exact right moment. The actors had to do this quite extensive rehearsal before each take because the film is quite expensive too. So if you're running 10 minutes of footage, that's quite a bit of footage that you're wasting if there's some problem within the take. And then, of course, too, when they had to plan out beforehand where the lighting and the sound crew was going to be so that they were not ending up in the shot. Now, later on, as you'll read, Hitchcock did call this film a kind of a stunt. And he was rather dismissive of it. But I do think it's a fascinating stunt nonetheless. And I give the film a little bit more credit than he does for it. But I think one of the reasons why he feels like it's a stunt, and maybe you get the sense that he's not proudest of this movie, is that he felt that he was breaking his own rules of cinema, which he felt depended on this theory of montage. That is, the theory that you make meaning with images by putting different shots next to each other and creating meaning by how one shot informs another shot. Now, normally shots within a film last between 5 and 15 seconds. And so, here again, in this film, each shot is lasting 7 to 8 minutes. So, it's less about how the shots are placed next to each other and how the shots inform each other, and it's more about what's within a given shot. So if you film all in one take, you can't cut together different images. As we're going to see with Rear Window later on, the effect of that film is entirely dependent on the montage, meaning how the shots are placed next to each other, because we are watching much of the film from one character's perspective, Jimmy Stewart's character here, Jeff, on the right-hand side, and the shots cut back and forth between Jimmy Stewart as a watcher and what he is watching. So it's a much different kind of approach to filmmaking than Rope is. Now, another significant and interesting thing to think about this film is that, as the screenwriter, Arthur Lawrence, recalled it, he said it was a film about homosexuality, or at least it's a film featuring gay protagonists. And at the time, of course, a Hollywood film could not have openly gay characters. But there's a very strong homoerotic subtext in this film. Some might say it's even so strong that you can't really call it subtext anymore, and you're just going to be calling it text. In any case, it is a really interesting film to think about in terms of how it deals with that homoerotic content. Robin Wood, in the reading that you're going to read, deals with that idea or that element really beautifully. And the film was particularly personally powerful for him when he saw it in the theater, because at the time he was a closeted gay man. And so just seeing the effect of a film like that in the theaters was just kind of a momentous moment for him personally in his life. And he reflects really beautifully on the film and what the film is doing. I mean, is the film kind of endorsing and affirming homosexuality, or is it in some sense homophobic? I mean, he deals with all of that in a really interesting way. Now, the play that the film is based on, it is itself, the homosexuality is overt. It's not hidden at all. It's talked about, it's discussed. In the film, it's not discussed. And reportedly, Lawrence, who adapted the play, and the screenwriter who adapted the play, he wasn't really very happy about the way that Hitchcock took out some of that homoerotic elements. But it is understandable why Hitchcock would make it less overt, given the Hollywood code for films at the time, where homosexuality simply was not allowed on screen, and you couldn't show a film if it had that. So, but I still do think that the homosexuality is quite obvious if you're looking for it. In fact, it's pretty obvious from even the really opening scene, if you think about what metaphors for sex might be, for example. We should also note that in spite of the screenwriter, Arthur Lawrence, being really upset that the film's homosexuality wasn't obvious enough, The film actually did face censorship, and I provided this New York Times article for you on Canvas, and it was discussing about the censorship of Rope. It's quite interesting to sort of look at how they dance around talking about the film being censored, but not really saying what they thought it was censored for. So really interesting short little article that I would highly recommend that you take a look at and read. Just to finish up this intro, a few reminders about classic themes and motifs or Hitchcockian elements to watch for. Consider again the idea of appearance versus reality and how that plays out in this film. Also, think about the moral ambiguity and how certain quote unquote good guys are compromised or how certain quote unquote bad guys are sympathetic. Also, consider the idea of mirrored characters or doubles here. Think about how suspense functions in this film. Hitchcock's bomb under the table metaphor works particularly well here, I think. Also, consider the presence of this sort of suave, elegant, cultured villain. And also, there's a really strong similarity between the justification for murder here in this film and the justification offered for murder that we saw in Shadow of a Doubt. There's kind of this idea that there is certain people who are of a certain class or status that should be able to kind of carry out murder, as it were. And then finally, we haven't seen this yet, but there's this idea that's raised of the perfect murder in this film. And that's something that we're going to see again in Strangers on a Train too, which is our next film after this one.